Hello and welcome to Jolie's, where you can get yourself some spicy sausage, some roasted nuts, and the freshest React content on YouTube. Today, I'm going to be looking at SunGuard Studios, how Mario Kart 9 tells us how strong the Switch 2 is by a game developer. This is a game developer talking to us about what he sees as the potential to Switch 2 in the few seconds of Mario Kart 9 that they gave us. So please trust me, he has something interesting to say. I record these intros at the end, so I know that there is some quality to the video I'm about to share with you. But before we get into what SunGuard Studios has to say, I would implore you to please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. I want to see how quickly we can build this community together to at least 100 subs. If you could do that for me really fast and maybe share this video with somebody who's really excited about the Switch 2 so they can see what the potential is going to be, I would greatly appreciate it. But with all that out of the way, let's get into the video. All right, 3, 2, 1, boop. Nice Pokemon. Look
Hello,
up.
everyone. Good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
All right.
My name is
You're
Jarrell. I develop video games full-time for a living.
Nice
Today I
suit,
wanted to
sir.
take a look at
great.
the Nintendo Switch 2, or if you read it the way it's written, the 2 Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
Uh,
That is something that I'm a little disappointed with Nintendo on. I do have to wonder. Okay, I see why they're going with Nintendo Switch 2. It makes a lot of sense, but this tells us something, in my opinion. Nintendo is projecting in the long run that the Switch frame, the handheld console that easily docks, is basically the future of the company for here on out. If they were thinking that this was just an upgrade and they would be taking a different direction in the near future, I think they would have called it the Super Switch, which is an amazing which is an amazing title for a console. Super Switch SS sounds great. I mean, let's face it, the SS branding has been used pretty well in the past. Love it or hate it, it was effective. But they know that they can't just they go Super Switch now, and they can go Ultra Switch, Infinite Switch. Like there's a ceiling on that. But if they start doing what PlayStation did back in the early 2000s and just go Switch 2, Switch 3, Switch 4, that they can keep making this form factor. This form factor is the future for the company, and so they're going to continue with in the immediate future. I'm sure we're going to see a Switch 3 before the end of the decade. So, but I do agree that they probably should have put Nintendo Switch above the 2 here.
we will take a look at the Mario Kart 9 video that they showed us to analyze just
this video. This is going to be such a short video. He has 17 minutes to talk about 15 seconds of footage.
how strong the 2 is compared to the Switch. So I will be approaching this as a developer. I've worked extensively on the 3DS, Wii U, and the Switch.
Oh, nice.
So I want to point
creds.
out the things that I see as a massive improvement that will really help developers get more out of their creative vision and to do more with their games. So I just want to make sure that I don't accidentally reveal anything that's protected by NDA, so I'm very careful with my script here. So the first thing I want...
That's promising. It shows that he knows more, and he's trying to give us a peek at what more he knows very carefully. So, it's like I can only talk about what I can speculate from what I'm seeing, but maybe it's already been confirmed to me. But if I hide it in the veneer of what's been speculated upon, I can get away with it. Nintendo can't blame me, or that sort of thing. So let's see what he has to say.
Want to point out is the universal use of physically based shaders. In computer development or video game design and with computers and graphics, a physically based shader is basically instructions on how a piece of geometry, like a character model, how that is going to look visually, how will it interact with other visual elements in terms of lighting and shadows. And a physically based shader is something that's able to take into account reflections from the environment. If light bounces off other surfaces, that it's able to express those colors in the lighting. And it's what has allowed games to look so much more interesting and engaging because of the more complex lighting. Something that I see
So this
here,
isn't quite
the
ray
lighting
tracing.
on this car here is actually quite telling, or this model here is, this is quite low quality, but if you watch the high quality video that I'll put the link to on Nintendo's channel, you'll see that there's a high resolution specularity map. Now, a specularity map is what tells a 3D model how shiny does it look in certain parts, what are the surface imperfections in terms of glossiness. So some parts, might look like it has less shininess because it's dirty. I've noticed that on a background element like this, it is very high resolution detail, and I will discuss that in more aspects as well. But every single
Okay.
piece of geometry that I see here is using physically based rendering for the shaders. Now, this is something that in general is quite expensive. So on the Switch, on the original Switch, you would be very careful with the complexity of your shader. The more complex your shader is, the more demanding it is on the hardware, the more frame drops you have. You get less performance out of the machine because physically based shaders are more expensive to render.
So that's, I mean, like, trust me, this guy is talking at a level that I myself, I'm not a video game developer. I've designed and developed a board game, X Seekers of Fortune, which I'm very proud of. But he's making an interesting point that I wanted to say. One thing that I love. I love that Nintendo is, pushing their graphics and their fidelity forward. But one thing I am worried about is I don't think Nintendo is necessarily dedicated to 60 FPS lock-in or even 30. Supposedly Tears of the Kingdom has like a lot of low frame rate issues. So I do worry that Nintendo would expand into this new graphical fidelity without, I would worry that they might not take into consideration or be strict about having frame rates be consistent and especially locked in at 60. So maybe he gets into that here in a bit, but that's one thing that makes me, causes me to take pause.
But what I'm seeing here is everything is physically based. You see the glossiness on the cart here, on the wheels. Now, this is a very subtle detail, but it is very important to notice this. And it can be quite hard to notice this, but Mario is actually receiving reflections from the ground here. If you have a look at the bottom of his face, you see it's quite...
Look at those pudgy cheeks of Mario. I wonder if I wonder if they're like reacting to having Mario made more traditionally handsome from the movie, and they're trying to be like, no, Mario's a pudgy guy.
Warm and yellow, even the bottom of his gloves. That means that they are actually accepting the reflections of the ground here. In this section here, you see extensive use of squash and stretch, which is what I was hoping we would see after Mario Wonder showed us such expressive animations for that game. So I'm really happy to see that sort of expressive animation. That's just so interesting to look at. Something that is very important to note here is the use of very high resolution ground textures on Mario Kart 8 versus what we see here, which we'll be calling Mario Kart 9.
Yeah, I love this game. I think it's nearly perfect, but graphically everything definitely looks a little flatter than we would expect in the modern era.
The texture resolution on the grounds on Mario Kart 9 is significantly higher. Now, ground textures, because they take up so much space, they are something that have to be high resolution. They can consume your available RAM very quickly. The Switch had only about 4 gigabytes of RAM. Some of it is reserved for the system. So if you have too many high resolution textures, your game will.
The Switch had 4 GB of RAM. My girlfriend told me how she thought the 5070 from NVIDIA was not an acceptable graphics card for her because it only had 12 GB of VRAM. So Nintendo's been operating with a quarter, one, two, three, a third of the RAM that my girlfriend would consider not acceptable for her to upgrade her PC to. So just something to take in mind. And trust me, when it comes to video games, she's definitely ahead of the curve compared to me.
Crash, and you'll get all sorts of other issues. So it's up to developers to make sure that they do not use too many high resolution textures. So on Mario Kart 8 and other Switch games, you see that you have to be very careful, and in general, textures are not very high resolution. But you can see here.
Oh, yeah, look at that ground. It's very unique. In comparison, the last ground looked very flat and stale, stagnant. And this ground, yeah, he's making a huge point here. This has a lot more going on. Cracks, crevices, even on this like low res version that he's showing off, you can tell.
In Mario Kart 9, especially here, these
well, yeah, they're definitely showing off with those cracks going down the center of the road.
Textures on the ground are very high resolution, and it is not just that they are high resolution, but there is a high number of unique textures that they use. So the reason why they can consume memory so much faster is because it is not just one texture that is being used. There's multiple graphical files that are being supplied. Okay. You have one file that determines the color, what the actual graphics are. You have one that controls the normal maps, how bumpy the surface is, but it can also catch light and express a sense of depth and shadows. You also have your specularity maps. You can optionally have ambient occlusion, which sort of explains to the renderer how something should occlude light, if it should.
I mean, and he didn't really show off footage to show the difference here, but just the fact that we're seeing Mario. Bowser back there looks almost as clean as Mario up here, and obviously this is a video game, not a film where you have to worry about depth of field in the camera. You can kind of like avoid that, but still, it's not like we have a lower polygon version of Bowser back there, or at least it doesn't seem like it. Like he almost looks equal to Mario up in the front.
Exclude light to make it look darker in some areas. You can have height maps as well. You can have detail maps. You can have...
maybe one of the best versions, like one of the best renders of Mario we've seen right there. That is beautiful.
Masks that explain where to have details. So all of those textures contribute to just one piece of geometry, and when you increase the resolution, all of those things in general, you would increase the resolution of all of those things unless you want to manually optimize. So you're not just going and increasing the size by a little bit, you're increasing the size by a significant amount. So I would not be surprised if the RAM for the Switch 2 was between 12 to 16 gigs.
Okay.
Because this is significantly more detailed. Something that is extremely important, that I think is the most important that we see here, is volumetric lighting. Volumetric lighting is not real lighting like we have in the real world. Nothing in a video game is what it actually represents in the real world.
Not to get too off on a side rant, but I 100% like him saying this is one of the reason why I earnestly believe realistic graphics are kind of like a trap, or at the very least, it's a never-ending tunnel cul-de-sac that isn't going to actually make gameplay any better. I think that graphics should first and foremost be representative, not realistic. Like, that's the R we should be going for. Representative graphics. They should represent what we want to see, what we believe we'll see. So, it's just definitely, I think Pixar said a long time ago they could make their movies look super realistic, but that doesn't actually, make people interested.
Volumetric lighting is advanced lighting that we have seen in many modern games that create a sense of density in the atmosphere.
Okay.
Light passes through the density and it makes games look realistic, but not
Yeah. I mean, like you could just see it right here on this screen that he's showing off. Like those, like that looks. I come from Texas, not a very mountainous state, but I did drive out a few times to Arizona, and when you hit El Paso, you see mountains in the distance, and this looks like very similar to what it looks like looking at mountains out in the horizon. You know, it has a little more detail there in real life, but it has that same haze and blurriness when they're out far enough.
not just realistic, it makes games look interesting.
Yes.
Because it makes it look like the air has density to it. It can communicate a sense of fog, or it can be used for clouds, dustiness. You can see here, I can tell this is real volumetric fog. Normally games would fake a volumetric fog with a number of different techniques. In Mario Kart 8, what they did is they used just a basic distance fog, and that is very cheap to render, and then they used a whole lot of bloom. Bloom is a visual effect that is applied to the end image on screen that just sort of blurs the edges between the light areas and the darker areas of the scene to make it appear to have a soft halo. I'm not seeing that is significantly toned down. There's significantly less bloom here because now they have true volumetric lighting. True volumetric lighting is very expensive to render on the Switch. On PC, PlayStation, Xbox, it's not a big deal, but it is very expensive on the Switch. It takes a huge bite out of performance. If you try to have volumetric, you're basically cutting out, like, depending on if you're at lower resolution, you can minimize it to about like 20 to 25 frames a second, but true volumetric lighting at high resolution, if you're drawing at 1080 on the original Switch, you're probably going to force your game to run at like 15 frames a second, and that's just with the lighting. That's not taking into account anything else in the scene. So the fact that this is using true volumetric lighting, where it takes into account the distance, the height, you can have certain areas be more dense the farther you get. You have light passing through it, it creates light rays. So it is just very pleasing.
I know this is a graphical analysis of the Switch. I just want to say I love the idea that there's a Yoshi's Diner. That is cute as hell. That's why I love watching these kind of videos. It's like there's so many details they packed in to this, 15 seconds that they wanted us to appreciate, and you were only going to appreciate it if you watched it over and over again like this.
To look at. It's very visually engaging and interesting. It's very expensive. That tells me that the Switch 2 is significantly more powerful because they want these games running. They would want this running at 60 frames a second, if you're running at 1080. I'm not sure if this will have 4K using post-processing, but at 1080, surely they would want 60 frames a second. Nintendo products generally aim for very high level of quality. And to have volumetric lighting at that resolution, at this frame rate, is insane. I hope Mike's explanation helps you understand this is a massive deal. This is the most important part of this reveal trailer to me, is showing this sort of volumetric lighting, because it is a massive deal. It's what contributes to a huge amount of slowdown on games on the original Switch. Okay. So next we also have
and that feels like what the mission statement of the Switch 2 has been about. Like, going into it is like they want to be able to port over the AAA games from the last decade, and be able to say you can play, for example, like you could play Red Dead Redemption 2 on the Switch, and other games like that. So they're showing off to those who know that our new console is capable of doing what other PCs and PlayStations of the past 10 years are able to do. So that is very important for their mission statement.
The shadows being drawn at far distance. You can see over here the shadows are still being drawn. Over there you still have shadows. If you look at games on the original Switch, they will do what is called culling. They will cull the shadows so that once an object is too far, it's a certain distance from the camera, they will no longer draw shadows. That is because shadows are quite expensive to calculate and draw. And so to preserve the performance of your game, you would have shadows not be drawn. And you'll notice that very prominently in many games, especially if you look at games like Pokemon Violet or Pokemon Scarlet, you'll see the shadows being cut off very obviously. And that's just something that we have to do on the Switch because shadows are expensive. But I see these, I'm trying to see if there's a cutoff point here that's discernible, but I'm not necessarily seeing a cutoff point here. I'm looking at far into the distance at the terrain to see. It's very difficult to tell, but
I
over
would
there,
say I
over
see
there,
shadows
that's
at least
still being drawn.
yeah, to the second
Yeah.
light pole.
There's shadows there. This tells me that volumetric lighting and shadow calculation and drawing is now significantly easier on the hardware. And it is a big deal because these are high resolution shadows. If you look at Switch games, the resolutions of the shadows are usually extremely low and they look pixely and blocky. These are high resolution shadows. They're being drawn at distance.
Yeah.
Obviously, they can implement some techniques so that at distance shadows are drawn at lower resolution. This is a huge deal. That is massive. Next, we have even the density of unique textures is very telling. We have so many different unique pieces of geometry. Models themselves, the 3D geometry, they don't really have that much of an impact. They are not expensive to store in memory. They're not expensive to draw a bunch of different things necessarily. But having the high resolution textures, having a lot of different textures, that is what stresses out the original Switch. That's what holds games back because they take up memory so fast that they will just crash your game. So the fact that there are so many unique pieces there are so many unique materials.
Yeah, I mean, like, yet again, talking about how detailed, like, these, Pixar says that they sand the underside of the desk drawer is like their way of saying, paying attention to the details. And, these toads here on the, the right side of the screen, like these background characters look as though they're, obviously they're not going to have as much detail put into them as a character that you play as, but they look detailed, like well detailed enough that if we were to zoom into them, we wouldn't think that they were like lazy. At least I assume. So yeah.
All of them have different textures. And of course, as I explained, there are multiple graphical files that go into one texture or one material. There's so many different things here. That is extremely telling that this system is significantly more powerful. We also have cloth simulation. If you have a look at the flags here.
Okay, let's see them.
They're all billowing in the wind. This does not look like keyframe or bone animation to me. That looks like real-time cloth simulation, and that is actually quite expensive. Again, on the original Switch hardware.
I'm just going to say, trying to look out for these flags and watching that same clip over and over again is kind of giving me a little bit of seasickness.
Where it's something that you only have a little bit of because it is demanding on the processor. It costs frames per second. It's going to cause your FPS to drop. So you use it sparingly. But I'm seeing all of these flags have cloth simulation, which means that the Switch 2 has significantly more power for physics simulations. That means calculating vertices as they're being affected by other objects, moving other things. The wind is causing the geometry to deform. So the fact that all of those are cloth animating is a massive deal because, again, the original Switch could handle it, but not a lot. It took a huge bite out of performance. So having that is...
it's like one thing probably to have like your main character have bellowing cloths as part of their character design, but it's another thing to have like, a dozen flags that can incidentally just be in the background of your game. Also show that, that's like the devil, the devil's in the details like how the density of how many objects you want to have that below, and for such a insignificant background feature to have that seems pretty impressive.
A massive deal. It is going to have much stronger physics simulation, and it's going to make characters' clothes look really cool as they're billowing and moving around, and we can have so much more of that in the environments now. We have I already explained the high detail density, the high number of geometry and textures, the environmental reflections, but also we have very high poly counts on the models. If you compare this stuff to Mario Kart 8, again, you'll see that the character models themselves are significantly rounder and smoother. You don't see the jagged edges of polygons like you did on Mario Kart 8. So obviously this will be able to handle significantly higher poly counts for drawing. This isn't necessarily a huge deal.
Talk about that stretch and squish. Mario's face right there, great example of that as he takes that like little bump in the road.
Because the original Switch was pretty good at poly crunching. That was one of its strengths. One of the original Switch's weaknesses was drawing transparent pixels, or transparent like fog and fog particles, smoke particles, fire. On any hardware, that's quite expensive, but on the Switch, it was actually quite demanding. But the original Switch was pretty good at polygon crunching, so the fact that Switch 2 is pushing that even further is very nice to see, because that just means we can have more density in detail for characters. We can have more things on screen and still maintain a very good frames per second. That's the end user experience is just going to be smoother. So that is what I wanted to share with you. As a developer, I'm extremely excited. And for me, I'm personally frustrated working on the Switch, because I had a number of games that were going to be larger scale with realistic graphic styles. I had those in development, and there's been a policy that came from Unity, not from Nintendo, from Unity, when John Riccitiello was destroying Unity and they were announcing all these anti-consumer practices. They put in a policy where I could no longer use the older versions of Unity. So basically the former CEO of Unity forced developers to switch their projects to newer versions of Unity. But the problem is the newer versions of Unity are very broken. Compared to older versions of Unity, the newer versions are way slower to use as a developer.
I just want to say I was not expecting this to end in a rant against Unity, though I do recall, like, as he's saying it, I do recall the big hoopla that came from the internet about Unity getting worse, and it's not a name you hear nearly as much as you used to in game development. So like the idea that maybe like the older versions were better suited to optimize for the Switch, and they forced people to start using later versions that weren't as good as it. It's an interesting little peek behind the curtain that he's giving off. That's what I really like about this guy, is he really sees things in the gaming space from behind the curtain and reveals it to us.
And the end performance is significantly worse. So the games that I had running well on the Switch that I had in development that had more realistic graphic styles, I wanted bigger environments with more realistic graphics. Now they're no longer tenable on the original Switch because of being forced to update my game to the newer version of Unity, and it's ruined a bunch of things. It's broken a bunch of features. Much of my frameworks that I've created, and some solutions for hair, environmental lighting, and physics simulation, all of those are broken on the new version of Unity. So what I'm most looking forward to now is bringing those games to the new Switch, because the new Switch will be significantly stronger, so that way I can achieve my vision of my games that I wanted to create, and I can share with people the games that I've created, the ideas, the worlds, the stories that I've come up with, that I've been working on. I no longer have to compromise and say, oh, well, my game's going to have to chug at 20 frames a second at this particular spot because of the game engine, because of some business decision from the game engine. So that is, for me personally, why I'm so excited about the Switch 2, is now I get to finally complete the games that I was working on that, unfortunately, Unity's business decisions made it so that if I were to launch my game on the Switch, it would not be a smooth experience due to the technology. So I'm very much looking forward to this. I am interested in seeing what other developers do with the Switch 2 as well. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. I just uploaded a video where I played banjo and I sing a song. It is a protest song for gamers against industry malpractices. So if you'd like
Well,
to click on
watch
that,
that
go
video
ahead
right there.
and check that out. Take care.
No, I mean, like, he gives me a lot of optimism about the Switch 2, and it's an interesting time for the Switch 2 because the industry is kind of catching up to like what the Switch did. It's like I don't know if Valve was ahead of the Switch or like concurrent with the Switch with the Steam Deck, but now the Switch 1 almost got to lead the market because it was like the first handheld, like the handheld of this quality. Obviously not the first handheld period, but this first like handheld that was like a console quality handheld. And Valve then released the Steam Deck, and then after that, all these other would be people to participate in the market. They're all chasing the Steam Deck. There's like, maybe a half a dozen Steam Deck like consoles out there that are all relying on like being a handheld PC, and now Nintendo's competing with those, and that's a lot harder to compete with. But the thing that they will have and obviously have had is the ease of use, the ease to develop for. So the more that they push towards like being able to be a lower res version of a near AAA title, if they can hold that, it's like you get AAA titles with like maybe moderate, medium to low graphical fidelity, and obviously like 720 to 1080p resolutions, then they're that they'll be able to compete. And the thing is like they got the brand name. Like, would you like today? Would you got one choice? What is it? The Lenovo. I forgot the name. Vanguard. Probably not. But basically, would you get? I mean, if I'm a Mac user and I've been highly considering getting a Steam Deck to so I can just build up my Steam library and not have to worry about like researching if a game is playable on Mac, or just limiting myself to what's playable on Mac. So I highly consider the Steam Deck. But if Nintendo were to come along and offer a console that essentially plays every PC game, that would be very appealing to me. I have a lot of trust in Nintendo. I feel like anything wrong with almost at this point, I think we're going to look back on the Switch and say, man, wasn't that a great proof of concept? Boy, aren't we glad that they figured out all their problems with the Switch 2, and the Switch 3 was just immaculate, and the Switch 4, oh my God, the Switch 5, wasn't that a little overpriced at the time? I think they overextended themselves, but they really got it back together on the Switch 6. That's maybe the future I'm imagining here. I don't know, but ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to say is like Nintendo. I feel like Nintendo's in a corner they didn't quite imagine themselves in, where now they're competing with people who are ripping them off, but they are doing it with the backbone of the PC gaming market behind them. Like before, they had to worry, back the first time they revolutionized video games with the Nintendo Entertainment Console, the NES, they just had to worry about people playing catch up. But now they're dealing with people who are almost like cutting them off at the pass, because they are it's just like, oh, if we can put a console together that plays games that Steam offers, then we instantly have a humongous library. And Nintendo's, their first party stuff is so good. Now they just need to make sure that they can develop that third party catalog. Anyways, let's just get to the very end, see if he has anything else to say.
Everyone, I'll see you in the next video. Be well. Game on. Game on.
Game on, brother. You know what? I'm just going to go for some bonus content. All right. All right, let's see how he is at banjo.
I want to thank you all for coming out here today. Sure, I'm glad to see you. I want to play a song for you. Now, there's a lot going on in the world today. Lots going on with the games industry, entertainment media, and it feels...
All right, Willie, get to it.
Feels like people are losing hope. It feels like something they are passionate about, something they care about, has been taken away from them. People feel like there's no hope, that there's no way forward, that there's no way to fight back against something, an enemy that feels like it is totally out of their reach, totally out of their control. But there is a way to fight back against narcissism, against hatred, against something that's trying to tear us apart. Something important to keep in mind, especially in the games industry, is that corporations are trying to turn us against each other. For them, it's all about money. And I'd like to find a way forward where at the end of the day, we don't hate each other for it. We don't see each other as enemies regardless of our skin color, our race, our sexual identity. Because none of those things matter. None of those things are important to who you are as a person. None of those things make you a good or bad person. But the corporations out there who are only interested in money, they want you to believe that. They turn us against each other. They make us fight each other.
Hell yeah, brother. As a class warrior, the only thing that matters when it comes to these large-scale political issues is the class that you're in, not the identity group that you're in. Now, with all that said, the song should be doing the speaking here. And we're a minute 33. So, a minute 33. So I think you get into the song.
Many years ago, a great man named Pete Seeger played a version of this song. He wrote lyrics for it for his time to help his people get through a difficult moment in their history. And so I've written lyrics for this song so we can get through this together with a smile on our faces. Give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, that's good enough for me. I have purchased every remake, though the changes were a mistake. This is not what I asked for, now that's enough for me.
I feel a little rude pausing mid-song, but this is a reaction video, so I got to. But I think he hit it pretty well up there at the beginning where, I mean, even remakes of games are, you know, they sway in quality, but it always feels like there's like something that, you know, tarnishes the game with the remake, or often there is if it's not made by Blue Point or something like that. So, you know, pretty spot on so far. Also, you know, pretty good banjo skills.
Every remaster's expensive, though the patch notes aren't extensive. They did not fix the glitches, now that's enough for me. Give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, that's good enough for me. They have replaced Ted Woolsey, they won't hire Ogasawara. Now they hire blue-haired activists, so that's enough for me.
Let's, you know, listen to the brown-haired activist and be suspicious of the blue-haired ones.
I have bought this game already in collections 1, 2, and 3 on 7 different platforms. Now that's enough for me.
Yeah, like, I feel as though that's all they're selling us for the most part. Like, I have, you know, I've debated the getting into the next console generation, but it feels like the cutting edge at this point is not especially exclusive for consoles. It feels like consoles are just selling, like the thing that they are most interested in is taking the most popular games from their last two generations and remaking them and putting them on the consoles. And sometimes that's a freaking knockout. Look at Demon Souls. But the fact that we've had 3 different iterations of The Last of Us for 3 different consoles. How many times has Skyrim has come out for basically everything? It's not Doom. I mean, at least for me. So, I don't know. It's like if we're talking console gaming right now, I feel like, yeah, I know PC gaming has its bad things about its graphical fidelity and, a lack of optimization, but I think that's true for consoles as well. And I just don't feel like there's a reason for me to buy a console aside from like Astrobot is like the one game I can think of that's a PS5 exclusive that I want to play. And aside from that, gun to head, I feel like for every Astrobot, there's probably like 3 dozen PC games that are never coming to the PlayStation 5 that I would rather dip my toe in.
Give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, that's good enough for me.
Solo. Nice.
Why'd they change the graphics with much worse pixel assets? They're angry and they blame me that the game is not for me. The dialogue is angry at straight white men like me. I guess games are for politics now, so that's enough for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I come from an era where Mario jumps on Goomba. What's political about that? Unless you're like a really sensitive Italian American.
Give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, that's good enough for me. Give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, give me that old emulation, that's good enough for me.
Good job, brother. Also, props. You know how to play banjo. You showed it. Decent enough singing.
I can see a way forward for us out of this mess with entertainment media, especially the games industry. And the way forward does not end with us seeing each other as enemies. There is no room for a cultural divide for us in the future. We have to understand who the real enemies are. That is multi-million and billion-dollar corporations trying to tear us apart, trying to make each other see us as enemies based on our skin color, our gender, our sexual identity, and politics. We are not each other's enemies. Those corporations that only care about money, those are the enemies. Because all of us are gamers. Amen. And we're in this together. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Be well. I'll see you next time.
And see you next time, folks.